How is the system rigged to keep people in their 20s and 30s stuck in their head, stuck in life forever?
I think we're going deep pretty fast. So I think the system is not necessarily rigged as if there's one puppet master, one guy holding the strings of all this stuff. I think it's many, many things. And maybe 2/3 of it is just the algorithms that are pushing profit. But when it comes down to you want to get anyone stuck, there's three steps that you need to do to get people stuck. And that's PDS. That is pacify, distract, and sedate. Pacify, so we're like pacify you as much as possible, distract you as much as we can, and then sedate you. And if you look at the rise of things that people are doing in life that are anesthetic quality, not just like drugs, but people looking at porn and video games are up, VR is through the roof, and that becomes kind of an anesthetic for our life. But if we look at modern tactics of the psyop that is happening to keep people stuck, it starts with one thing called flooding. So we want to drown out the real signals that are with overwhelming noise. This is memes and drama and fake news and riots. So I want to drown out as much as I can, just overwhelm. And then it's repetition. So I want to repeat a message enough and it becomes an internalized truth for people. And then the next step is mimicry. So the way that it's working now, and when I say psyops, I'm not talking about the US Army. I'm talking about a psychological operation. I just want to put that out there. But they now imitate everyday content. And this is TikTok, the Instagram posts, influence, and stuff like that. And then we have gamification. So the next step of this, the final two steps are the biggest. The gamification is where we make ideology feel like a lifestyle or a team sport. And that's big. And then just to seal it in, we use false consensus. So we use a bunch of bots or fake accounts to simulate popular opinion. And once that's happening, we get people who can't really grow up. And I think the biggest layer, this is a super nuanced answer, but the biggest layer is if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's this little triangle where we have like survival and then safety and then love and belonging. And then we have like self esteem and all the other stuff. But the love and belonging, that's our social need. And what we have on social media now, we have this TikTok, Facebook, whatever you want to say. Our brains are not capable, 100% not capable of managing a social network that large. And the social media serves as a placebo of fulfilling that social need. So what happens is our brains are thinking that we're getting that social fulfillment, but we can never go past it, which means we never get to esteem. We never get an actual fulfillment of that. We get these dopamine hits that feel like social connection, but they're not. It's not satisfying that ancestor part of our brain. So it is stuck in that place. And massively, what happens as a result of that is I can't have empathy for every bad thing that goes on around the world. It's not possible for anybody. Uh, so we see people in outrage about one or two things, but there's a guy that maybe got murdered 2 blocks away from their house. They don't have time to deal with that because they're worried about Ukraine or they're worried about something else going on. So now that we have so much overload of social connection and negative news, we have apathy. And I do believe that this is an engineered apathy, and that's the real cause of all this.
So, do you think there's a way out?
I do. I make videos about this on my channel all the time. And I think the way out is not just like go live in a cave and like become Amish and like throw your iPad in the trash. I think the way out is starting to realize what is simulated and what's not in your life. And where are we looking at a label of something and thinking that that's the thing, the word is the thing? Where am I looking at social connection on Facebook and tricking myself into thinking it's real? Because what this has made us do is pretend. And all of us have just fallen into this trap of I need to fake something. I need to pretend like I've got all my together. Like we see all of these videos online of these content creators like Everything looks good in the background, but you go to their normal life, their off-camera life, it's absolutely falsified. So the way that we do this is we realize what's fake in our life and where we are pretending. And the biggest thing that's been engineered over the last few years is this fear of social injury. And that is weaponized. If you look at like the biggest fear of people is public speaking, but it's actually judgment. So the fear of judgment has been weaponized. And we talked about this like with your first question. Stop being a victim to the fear of judgment is the biggest thing. And even if you're just starting small, just be okay with receiving a social injury once or twice and be okay with being non-perfect. And if you're watching the news on a regular basis, I would say that's worse than, in my opinion, I would say that's worse than like smoking a few packs of cigarettes for your health and for your mental well-being. I would say, like, if you're watching the news, that would be step one. Is like, I haven't watched the news in probably 9 years, 8 or 9 years. And it's amazing. But if something's going to happen here, my neighbor's going to text me. My family's going to say, "Hey, did you see this thing that happened?" Maybe I'll see some events that are important, but our brains are not wired to handle a world full of news. Our brains are wired to handle 100 people max, maybe 150. And that little tribe is what we're supposed to handle. And we're tricking ourselves because our brains have not evolved in 200,000 years.
And how can people have like a nuanced relationship, or is that possible? Like, meaning, like I heard you say that social media creates this false sense of connection. And yet I think people want to still figure out, how can I stay informed? How can I stay connected to people online that I may or may not be friends with? And then the same thing with the news, where they're like, hey, like, probably shouldn't be watching the news every night before I go to bed. And I also want to stay informed with what's going on. Like, is there a way to have a healthy balance with these things so that it doesn't wreck people's lives?
I don't think I'm the expert. I'm the guy that studies how it damages us and how, and I'm not even studying it for health reasons. I'm studying it because I teach interrogation. I teach people how to make people do things that are not in their best interest. And this is getting someone to confess to a crime. This is, uh, or if they think it's not in their best interest. So if somebody has a severe depression and they go see a psychologist, they think getting rid of that, which is a part of themselves, is not in their best interest. So this is what I really studied. But I think the balance comes down to awareness, a deep, deep awareness, because Papa Carl, as we call him in all of my trainings online, Carl Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life, and you will call it fate." And most of what we think is our fate is just a bunch of running in the background, a bunch of unconscious stuff that's going on that we're not aware of. So getting hyper aware of your screen time, getting hyper aware of where I feel this need to pretend, and why do we feel the need to pretend? Social media has hijacked this thing, so we fear social injury. So getting hyper aware is step one. There's not like you need to wake up at 5 and take a cold shower and take zinc and magnesium and all this like perfect morning routine. Just make the in your life that's unconscious, bring it as much as you can to the surface and do it on a regular basis. And keep in mind that the mammalian brain that makes all of our decisions and that governs our whole life doesn't speak English. You will never affirmation your way out of this stuff. Like, that's, using language is not the right way to do it. Using awareness is. So we have this part of our brain called the reticular formation. People online commonly refer to it as the reticular activating system. So in your brain, if Doug is searching for white 2025 white Toyota 4Runner TRD Pro, then you've got all these specifics and stuff. And then you finally go and buy one. The day you start driving it, you're going to see it everywhere. You're going to be like, "Whoa, everybody's got the same car as me." And that's not because you told your brain using language to do that. The biggest changes in our life, when we fall in love, we watch our kid get born. All of these big things that happen in our life and these big shifts in our unconscious are never rooted in the use of language. So how can I get the awareness up there so much that I'm telling that reticular formation in the brain that this is very important so that the mammalian side of our brain starts searching for it?
What do you think is a good like first step for someone who is like in this simulation and on autopilot and they're just used to doing the same stuff over and over again? They're scrolling social media, they're not taking care of their health. Like what's the first thing they can do to start to develop this hyper self-awareness?
So the number one thing is disruption. Anytime you want to start deprogramming someone or even brainwashing someone, either way, or backwards or forwards, you want to start with destabilization and some kind of agitation with lifestyle. So if I expect something, I need to disrupt the expectation. I'm going to wake up. I'm going to brush my teeth, maybe with my left hand. I'm going to repaint my bedroom. I'm going to move my furniture around. I'm going to routinely do things that disrupt the scripts that I'm following through my life. So if one of my scripts is scrolling on Instagram for an hour, maybe a couple hours a day, I'm going to set a time limit. Like if you look at the new iPhone, you can set app time limits and stuff on yourself. And I don't mean that I can't reopen the app, but I'm just going to disrupt the script when that time limit thing pops up. I'm going to do everything I can to start disrupting those routine scripts in my everyday life. One of the things I've had my clients do is there's this stuff that physiotherapists use called KT tape. You ever heard of that stuff?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's like stretchy stuff. It's got two sticky ends on it. And it's kind of like to pull the fascia away from muscles. I'm probably making that up. I'm not an expert. But just putting that on your body, no matter where you put it, is going to refocus your energy throughout the entire day. So just having like pulling your chest apart or having it to where like if you slouch, it's going to like tighten up. That's going to tell your brain over and over without English, without any words. It's going to tell your brain over and over something is different, something is new. You need to pay attention. So the fastest way to break out of the scripts is to start disrupting them on a regular basis.
And I think that sometimes people, when they hear what we're talking about, or they have this gut feeling that the world is quote unquote against them, or they're wired to fail or whatever, they fall into like the victim mindset. Like how would you like interrogate yourself? Or what questions would you ask to be able to snap yourself out of a rut like that and escape the victim mindset?
That is so tough, especially when it's a behavioral pattern. I would say the fastest way to do it is listen to the expert on a regular basis. And I would say that's like Jocko Willink. Can snap you out faster than Chase Hughes ever could. But if you want to snap out of any kind of rut like that and you see yourself kind of going into this victim mindset, that is amazing. And you should celebrate that because 99% of people aren't even aware that they're in it. So if you've got to that point where you realize that I might be, you know, victimizing myself, you need to get out of that mindset. But the fastest way is I need to start disrupting scripts. Because even if you watch Jocko all day, every day, you read all of Jocko's books, you're running on scripts. So we're running on autopilot 10 times more than we think we are. Throughout our entire day, we're running these autopilot scripts from our behavioral patterns. So no matter what we read, remember that's language. We have to disrupt patterns so that the brain pays attention. So we have to do things differently where the brain has no more ability to predict the future.
I think when sometimes people are trying to get momentum, like journaling or even like putting their thoughts out there, setting goals can help. What do you think are some of the most important like questions someone should ask themselves, or important maybe like journaling prompts? Like if you were trying to, get someone to snap out of that behavior change and be consistent with how they're moving forward in life.
Some of the most important questions to raise are what are the things I do automatically every day? Like, what are the things I'm doing automatically and how can I start breaking out of that? But second is, what are the things that make me emotional? What are the things that I get upset about? And that's where we're going to find those little identity fragments. And Carl Jung talks about this so much that I have my office is just like full of Carl Jung's books. What I really want to do is on a repetitive basis, What am I doing? Not just on autopilot, but how am I judging other people? And that number one is going to help you start identifying those unconscious patterns of like, I'm carrying some kind of secret, concealed shame that I don't want anybody to know about. Um, and when people are concealing shame and guilt, the biggest thing is they think that they're the only one. Uh, but I can tell you, this is 100% people are doing this, and whether or not you feel bad about it is the measure. So, where am I judging other people, and where am I carrying some kind of hidden shame? And that the hard part about the hidden shame part is that some people will carry this hidden shame and they will feel like me feeling bad about this one thing that happened in middle school or this thing that happened a couple of years ago. If I feel bad about it, that makes me a good person. That's the biggest load of that you could ever hold inside of your brain. Feeling bad about something does not make you a good person.
Yeah, and it's tough because I think that a lot of times, like going back to this victim mindset, I think people will use their past as a way to justify current behavior. They'll say, well, I was picked on in school. My parents got divorced. I mean, I did all of this and I wound up in jail. And people end up using these excuses as a way to justify how they act now. And it's tough because their brain has now convinced them that it's okay to behave that way because they're used to getting people patting them on the back and telling them it's okay. And then the sob story is there's commodity in that.
There really is. And I think if you look at it from a different angle, that's the first big thing that we all need to do is I need to take my little GoPro that's normally stuck way behind my head and put it out in front of my eyes and start changing my perspective. This is why, like, just a shift in perspective can solve depression, and it can help people with PTSD and all kinds of other things. This is why that we're starting to see that psychedelic therapy is like one of the most effective things ever tested.
Well, and I think it's tough because people for decades, like they're just used to seeing like one perspective, having one view of the world, and they've essentially kind of manipulated their own perception of reality, and it just takes so much work to snap out of it, and it's tough. Like how do you think people can be consistent with it when they have been inconsistent for years and they're just somebody that has had the same like type of worldview for a period of time and they're trying to like make that shift to be consistent with behavior change?
If they're trying to change themselves, the number one thing that we can do is form a visual relationship with your future self. And this sounds maybe we talked about it on the last podcast. I don't remember, but you download an app that makes you look like a 95-year-old, and you do that thing. You take the selfie, you looking at it, and it makes like AI warps your face, or I don't know how it works, but you print that sucker out and you put it on your fridge. You put it on everywhere you want it to. You want to be reminded, and so most people don't prioritize our future selves because we have no ability to visualize them. They're hard to think about. But what we're doing is not using language. We're not using affirmations. We're showing the mammal part of our brain what we want to focus on and where we want to place priority. So if I want to be consistent, the only reason I fail to be consistent is because I'm prioritizing myself right now. What do I want? What does present tense me want right now? And we're saying F you to the future tense version of us. So shift number one to make so many changes in your life is can I teach my mammalian brain to start forming a prioritized relationship with future me?
Could you do that with like situations like, I imagine if somebody is like in a relationship and they're acting disrespectfully to their partner, like would there be a way to like look at like a future version of that relationship or someone who's addicted to drugs and they're like, "Hey, what's my life going to be like in 10 years?" Like can that app do something similar or would you like have to almost like draw a completely different picture?
I think that our brain is wired to go against things a lot more than it is towards something positive. It's made to go away from something negative. If you look at our ancestors, they were way more likely to confuse a stick for a snake than a snake for a stick. So our brains default to negative to keep us safe. So if you're trying to avoid something, maybe printing two versions of that picture out, one where you're missing some teeth, maybe somebody's on drugs or something, or one where you're morbidly obese and 85 or 90 years old. A lot of those can help the mammalian brain say, I don't want that, because our brain, people are saying like you're programming your brain all the time. But if your brain doesn't like something, it's going to be repulsed by that. And I know that you're not, if you're putting negative stuff into your brain on a very regular basis, it's very hard to just want that negative thing. You're not going to drive toward it automatically. So keep in mind, our brains are wired to move away from negative stimuli. So we just create that negative stimuli to help us form that relationship with the future self.
So from a on a day-to-day basis, like we're kind of bringing this together, like we've got companies and things that have created this simulation for people to feel like they're stuck or even more stuck than they actually are in their life. And then you have these people that are trying to change and they're watching your content. Maybe they're listening to this episode and they're like, hey, I realize my relationship with social media is unhealthy. I probably should change my friends. I probably should put the substances down. I should probably work out, like all the things. And yet they're up against this battle that exists that's way more powerful than they are, right? How can people navigate that on like a day-to-day basis? Like what would that framework look like so that they are working towards self-improvement and yet they're not letting this, psyop kind of affect them while they're on their way?
I think that from a day to day basis, the main thing that a person can do to start getting out of this rut is developing that future self relationship where our mammalian brain sees it. That is number one. But number two is just making the unconscious conscious. So let's go back to that for just a second with this new question. If I know that I need a new friend network, there's part of me that I'm not really aware of that I need to make more aware in my brain. So I need to like write all this stuff out. Maybe I need to build a spreadsheet. Maybe it's some visual thing that I need to do. I need to make these problems as crystal clear to my conscious brain as I possibly can. So if I'm on social media today, maybe I'll go to Michael's or Walmart and I'm going to get a big poster. I'll draw a little grid on there, and with a big Sharpie, I'm going to go up there every day. I'm going to write how many hours, because your phone tracks it all. I'm going to write my screen time on this big board. The stuff that we used to just unconsciously pursue is now getting forced closer and closer and closer to conscious awareness. That is the fastest way you can do it, because if I want to manipulate you, if I'm running a psyop against a country of any size, the first thing I want you to do is pacify, distract, sedate. Those things, so all of the negative behaviors, all the things that I want you to be doing are happening unconsciously. And the fastest way to do that is just to get someone to do something on a regular basis. And second, get you to believe that lots of people are doing it so I can normalize the behavior.
What are your thoughts on motivation? Do you think it actually works? Like, can somebody like, read something or look at themselves in the mirror and be like, hey, I want to make this change? Like, can that carry them, or do you think it's BS?
I think a lot of motivation is going to be based in neurochemistry. So some people say I had this big epiphany, and it may not have been the idea that they had. They might have traveled and they might have taken a supplement, or they might have balanced something inside their head. So I think a lot of motivation is neurochemically based. And there are so many cases where we see people that are going to see a coach. They're working one on one with a coach that's working on their mindset and walking them through these questions, exercises, and all this other stuff. Meanwhile, 10 years later, they discover that they've got a vitamin D deficiency. Or later on down the road, they're deficient in zinc, or their epinephrine, norepinephrine brain chemistry is out of whack, and they just need to add something to their lifestyle or their diet to get that back in. So I think we tend to assume that a lot of psychological problems, symptoms, are psychologically rooted. when in fact it's a physiological deficit of some sort that's causing the psychological symptom. And there's cases where somebody goes to a therapist office or goes to see a therapist, and they're like, "Well, every time when I'm walking to work, my hands get numb and tingly. I feel really nervous. My heart's racing. I have this weird thing where I stop from walking and just feel kind of paralyzed as I'm doing these things." And they're like, "Oh, we have social anxiety. Let's work on that." And then they discover a few years later the person's got a brain tumor that was causing a lot of these symptoms. So we tend, as a culture, we tend to ignore in anything that's happening in our mind. We tend to ignore physiological issues that might be causing the symptoms.
You talked about how you haven't watched the news in 9 years. Is there anything, like, more recently, like, any kind of habits or shifts you've made in your own life, that you've made that have led to some self-improvement?
Yeah, 39. Yeah, 39 days ago, I quit drinking because so many of my friends had stopped drinking, um, and I was lying to myself that it's not harmful. And I have a brain disease, and alcohol, with the exception of maybe red wine, alcohol is a neurotoxin. It's a neurotoxic substance. And I was hurting myself. And that was one of the biggest shifts I've ever made. And the shift wasn't in like trying to quit and getting through the process of quitting alcohol and going through withdrawals and all that stuff. It's shifting your worldview to where you know so much truth about that alcohol that all the reasons that you might come up with for drinking are false. So you're flooding your brain with a maximum amount of truth and data to the point where the decision becomes a byproduct of your knowledge, and your awareness creates the byproduct of sobriety.
Was there anything in your life that was kind of going on in the moment, or were you just like, "Hey, I got this brain condition. My friends are doing this." Like, 'cause I mean, a lot of times with addiction, I'm sure as you well know, like something happens where it's like, "Crap, I'm at this crossroads. I either fix my life or things are about to get much worse."
I don't think I had a big crossroads. I think we our company started growing a lot, and I hired my sister as my CEO. So I had her quit her old job, and she came on, and my sister Holly is running our company now. And she quit drinking like 7 years ago. And what I noticed, we were at like a family Thanksgiving thing. People were kind of pouring out wine, and everybody was having a cocktail, scotch, and all that kind of stuff. And she didn't drink in it. And I asked her, like, if how do you resist it? That was my question. So that conversation with Holly was my big turning point. I said, "How do you resist the alcohol?" She said, It's not about resistance. It's about education. So like if you know enough about it, then you just won't. There will be no desire left in your entire body. And that conversation with Holly was a big catalyst for that.
What did that experience, like, teach you about behavior change, like, going through something like that? I mean, quitting alcohol is, like, for many, it's like people don't do it because it's so tough, and for a lot of people, it's like this challenge that takes months or years. Like, what did that experience teach you? This episode is brought to you by Suji. I've been a longtime fan of blood flow restriction training for a while, and I recently had Suji's founder, Alex, on the podcast to unpack the amazing benefits of it and how you can implement it into your existing training routine. One of the ways I've been implementing it lately is with my personal training clients. Everyone's got that one client whose knees start complaining before they even warm up. So we started using Suji. It's a wearable compression device that wakes up the muscles without loading the joints. Basically, it's how we keep training hard on days when the knees aren't feeling it. We've seen faster activation, less pain, and way more confidence in movement. Simple setup, big difference. Give Suji a try at trysuji.com and use my code DougBopst for 10% off. Again, trysuji.com, use code DougBopst for 10% off. Now back to the show.
I think that we very often lie to ourselves about the reasons that we do destructive things, whether it's being in a relationship or drinking too much or getting pissed off in traffic when we really shouldn't be. We are lying to ourselves, and we typically the right amount of truth will get us out of a lot of these negative behaviors, like it does alcohol or anything else. I'm just missing pieces of truth, which goes back to what we talked about, this massive shift in perspective that psychedelics can create is why that helps people stop addictions and stuff, because it gives you such a, it like zooms you out so far on everything that like you realize like I'm spending a whole lifetime thinking that A, I'm special, B, I'm separate from everybody else, and C, all of my little reasons that I have in my head for doing a lot of weird that I do are completely false.
I love where this conversation's going because, we started with talking about the simulation and the system, and now we're kind of blending that with like your own experience here because I think addiction is a simulation for a lot of people where they're just caught in the cycle of it and they can't get out. They don't know what to do. And I think these, from what I know, the first few months of recovery for people are very crucial because it's the time I think when cravings are really high, it's like you're recalibrating your mental well-being. If you were somebody who numbed with substances, again, I'm not saying you did this. I'm just saying this is generally speaking, and I think it comes down to habits, right? And what you're doing on a day to day basis to keep yourself busy. And again, towards this future version of yourself, like what types of things do you do like regularly now to keep yourself like away from potentially going back and drinking?
I mean, I have a full bar in my living room. And this is for when people come over, somebody wants to make themselves a cocktail or something, or maybe we have a party here at the house. Um, I think just the enjoyment of after you break the physical and the physiological addictions, the enjoyment of not needing that thing feels a lot like freedom to me. I'll speak for myself, but I think the that people focus a little too much on the chemical addiction to alcohol. I'm going to go through these withdrawals. I'm going to have. I'm worrying about DTS, which is delirium tremens, like this micro seizures that can happen when somebody's withdrawing. But we forget that about 90% of addictions are hand to mouth addictions. So I'm overeating food, I'm smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, or I'm taking drugs, or I'm smoking too much weed, or whatever it is. A lot of these addictions are hand to mouth. So when we try to get off, we miss out this hand to mouth gesture that we're so fond of and that we're so used to. So replacing that during the process of getting off of addiction or getting off of a substance is really important to have something there to help you wean off of the physical movement pattern as well as the chemical itself.
And so what can be helpful for people to do that?
Well, on the light side, kind of the caffeine free diet advice part of this would be like just having something there. So if I'm quitting drinking, I'm going to set up a scenario where I'm going to have something there that I'm sipping on throughout the evening, or if I drink at night, or whatever it is. And on the heavier side of this, and this is not advice for anybody, but you need to talk to your doctor. But psychedelics are one of the fastest ways that you can do this, and this is through a psilocybin journey, and now ketamine prescriptions are getting more commonplace. Doctors are feeling less anxiety and insecurity about writing the prescription for microdose ketamine, like to be used throughout the day. And this is like a 25 milligram troche that you can dissolve under your tongue, and it can help with addiction and coming off of things and anxiety and depression and PTSD and so much of these other things. Even though it's a man-made substance, it's it's proven to be so incredibly helpful, and its likelihood for abuse is so low. And like if you look at mushrooms, they're anti-addictive. Nobody's getting addicted to like psychedelic mushrooms or anything like that. So I think that's a huge revolution that I think people should be taking more advantage of. I mean, our ancestors used this stuff for millennia, and we kind of it's good to see that we're going through this psychedelic revolution right now, where there's so much of this stuff is starting to come out, and I think people are waking up to it.
So is there a way to mimic that without psychedelics? Because obviously, like, there's cost involved with that, and you want to make sure you're doing it under medical care. And there's people that, a lot of people who struggle with addiction are like completely sober, and that's like against their moral compass, especially if they're in like 12 step to do anything like that. So have you found like any practices that can, over time get you deeply connected to your subconscious so that you can kind of move forward with the pain and trauma in your life?
There is one, uh, the most effective thing I've ever seen that doesn't involve any. I hate to use the word drug. It's such a stupid word, and it's not appropriate to talk about psychedelics at all. But the thing that uses just our body is this thing called neurogenic tremors. And if you look at a mammal, the average mammal is programmed, all mammals are programmed to go through this tremoring process. So when a squirrel or a fox or a impala or a tiger or polar bear goes through some kind of traumatic experience, let's say they're drinking water at some watering hole, crocodile bites them in the neck, and they survive. They don't go back to their little tribe area or their den and like curl up under a tree for weeks at a time. And why don't we have that? Why don't we have psychogenic trauma in animals? And one thing that this guy who did the research on this, his name is Dr. David Berselli, brilliant, brilliant guy. He was a trauma surgeon, but he noticed that after these animals had this trauma experience, they go into this state that looks like the body is vibrating or shaking, almost like it looks kind of like a seizure. And you can even ask, if you know a police officer, you can ask a cop. They roll up on a car accident and there's an infant in the back seat in a stroller or a, not a stroller, like a car seat, and they survived. Their body goes into the shaking response. But think about this for a second. Throughout your life, like if you get into something that's super heavy, traumatic, or stressful, and your hands are shaking, like let's say you're trying to maybe dial 911, and what's the first thing people say when their hands are shaking? They say, I can't stop shaking, because we develop this instinct to suppress these tremors. And we all have the instinct to go into these tremors, but we have this instinct, like if I lay on the ground and shiver and shake around, that it's going to make me look sick. It's going to look like a seizure. Because what are people going to do if you're going into this tremor state? They're going to try to stop you as soon as possible. They will lay you down, tell you to stop, tell you everything's okay. So it's socially weird for us to do that. So we suppress this. But the cool thing is, you're not going to see a fox or a monkey or a squirrel with depression. You're not going to see it. And the one thing that we really suppress that they don't is this tremor response. And Dr. Berselli's work is he has named these tremors himself, but his system is called trauma release exercises, and it's free. You can watch it on YouTube. You can learn about it. And the cool thing is, it's not like you have to learn how to do it. It's built into your nervous system to handle this trauma response. The thing that takes time to learn is how to stop suppressing it, how to kind of take your finger off of that kill switch and let that stuff start coming out. And the really fascinating thing about it is that it's mostly just brainstem and spinal cord. You can have a full conversation while your body's going into this stuff. You look this up on YouTube separately, but you can watch TV, you can read a book, you can listen to an audiobook. You do not need to be consciously involved in the process. So the body really knows how to fix itself. And I've seen this. It's so popular and so effective that it was mandatory for us to go through some of this training coming back from a deployment overseas. And it changed my life. The first time I ever did it, it was life changing. And it takes you maybe 30 or 45 minutes to find your way into this tremor state. But once you do it one time, you can come back to those tremors very easily within like 5 seconds for the rest of your life.
That's fascinating. That's wild.
It's cool. And when you walk somebody through it, the first phase that we go through is called the ego phase, because I'm starting to do these tremors. I might be laying down, and we'll put somebody in a stress position for a minute to kind of induce the muscle tremors so that you're saying, yes, I want this, I want this. So you're teaching the brainstem that it's okay. You're kind of giving the brainstem permission to do what it's been not allowed to do for a very long time. And but the ego phase is what prevents us from really doing it, and that's what takes the time, is going through that ego phase of it's okay for me to do this, and I want this to happen.
One of the I mean, talking about ego, I think one of the things that people struggle with, I struggle with this a lot, is that you create this identity that you're a failure. Like for me, grew up and was cut from sports teams, didn't have success in relationships, was a drug addict, selling drugs, all these things. And I convinced myself that I was a failure. And it was hard, you talk about words, and I think the affirmation stuff is mostly BS as well. I think you have to talk to yourself in an optimistic way to like get yourself forward thinking or at least motivated to do anything. But my point is that on paper, life can still look like a failure to people, even though they're trying to convince themselves they're not. Like, how can people effectively bounce back after failing so that they don't fall into that trap that so many of us do, and that you create this identity that that you are a failure?
Yeah, this is great. So the first thing is we have to realize that we all have a narrator that narrates our life. The second thing is we choose what that narrator highlights and focuses on. So that narrator is going to dictate what we think and how we view our life and all of that. But a lot of this narrator is also about perspective. So like all these problems that we've talked about so far are perspective and priority. That's it. Perspective and priority. And it sucks to have this problem throughout our life and then like, oh, this one little shift can change this thing I've been dealing with. So we have some mental resistance to that. Like, why would something so simple solve this big complex thing? And I realized that people have very complex issues in their life, but this that doesn't mean the solution has to be complex. So number one, the narrator is there. And number two, you can remind yourself, for anybody going through this, remind yourself that going off of these details, saying that I am a failure, and then I know that this won't happen in the future for me. We're starting to border on narcissism because we're saying I picked to the right perspective. I know every detail of the story, and I know what to focus on, and I can predict the future. So we're starting to get into this little narcissistic, self-referential bubble of I know what the future holds. So number one, change the narrator. And number two, anything that's happened in your past, unless you're some weird psychopath or something, people need to be delusionally, delusionally self-forgiving. And that is the biggest step one to start changing the narrator.
It's tough, man. And it's tough because I mean, I just speak from my own personal experience of like the with the toughest part about it is the cognitive dissonance that exists where you are trying to change the narrative, and because you're so far back in life, or you think you're so far back in life, like what's in front of you just doesn't match the narrative you're trying to change. And then the idea of creating like the positive momentum you are creating doesn't feel good enough because you're paying attention to social media, or you're like you were addicted to substances which create this false sense of dopamine. Like how can people, start to feel good again and make life kind of exciting for where they're at, even though they still have a lot to learn and a long way to go on their journey?
Yeah, I think just dissecting some of those beliefs is the biggest way to do that. And dissecting it meaning like, is this objective or subjective? Am I really buried in this? And then one of the things I've done with a lot of my clients is take one of those beliefs. So let's say we've got somebody that says, I am a failure. So that means I can't be successful, or I can't do this thing. I can't have this stuff in my life. Then we'll make a giant meme, like with beautiful mountains on it, and we'll put the text on the screen like, uh, you have to be perfect in order to be successful, which is ridiculous, stupid. But we see the stupid idea on a regular basis, and we bring it into conscious awareness so we realize how stupid some of this internal dialogue is. So we made it like this, his desktop wallpaper, this big photo of mountains. And then we put on there, I think this guy that I'm referring to right now, he had some money psychology stuff, but his limiting belief was like, I can't make money, or I feel guilty if I make money. And then I can't make a lot of money because that means I'm a bad person because I'm not donating it. So we took his limiting belief and made it extreme. So we want to exaggerate that. So we took his limiting belief, and I think what he put on his desktop wallpaper was, "My kids don't deserve money." Because I told him, at the end of the day, that's really what you're saying. And if somebody thinks they're a failure, it's, my kids and the people that I lead don't deserve uh, me at my best. They need me to think that I'm a failure. Or I might put on the wallpaper, if I think I'm a failure, that means I'm a good person. Just to kind of bring that into conscious awareness as fast as we can, and show ourselves how absurd and ridiculous some of this stuff is. And I think at the end of the day, you watch somebody go through a psychedelic journey, some spiritual revelation happens in their life, they lose their loved one, and everything in their life changes. The first big thing that happens is, all the that I thought was a really big deal is not a big deal anymore. Everything that I thought was a huge deal is no longer a big deal. And this is no matter what kind of huge awakening someone has, that's step one to all of these awakenings, is everything I thought was a big deal ain't a big deal.
Shifting gears a little bit, but kind of building off of the failure conversation is I think it helps for people to have goals in life. And like we talked about this forward thinking approach. I also think, again, this quote unquote simulation that people live in, it's easy to get sucked into these insanely unrealistic goals. Like, I want to be a millionaire by the time I'm 25. Is it possible? Sure. But is it likely? No. Like all these insanely unrealistic goals that either A, defeat people in their tracks because they're like, how the hell am I going to get there? B, they end up doing like horrific things to get there because they care more about the goal than the journey. And C, they end up falling flat on their face like midway through because they realize like, oh, like life doesn't work this way. How do you think about goal setting, and how can people effectively do so?
Yeah, or they get the million and they're still depressed, and they're like, wait,
That too. There's the yeah, exactly.
I'm logging in, I'm looking at my bank account, and I still feel like. So any of those goals, I would say for everybody, and I've studied human motivation for a while. I don't think I'm a goal setting expert, but I would definitely say that being a million, what was the goal? Having $1 million for a town of 25. That is a that is a thing, right? So that is a symptom of something. Owning a yacht when I'm 23 is a symptom of having done something with my life. So when people are setting goals, what they're typically setting are symptoms. These are the symptoms that I want to have, but what they're not setting are the cause of those symptoms. So, like being a millionaire by the time you're 45, to do that, for that to be a byproduct, what would I have to do with my life? So, for all of our goals, we have to go back and say, how do I make my goal, this little shallow goal that I have on the top here, how do I make that a byproduct of how I live my life? So that's how we have to set goals. So most people are setting symptoms instead of goals. What we want to set are the causes. How can I cause that $1 million to be in my bank account? So that means I have to wake up at a certain time. That means I have to do this and this and this. Those should be the goals. The byproduct should be the $1 million by the time you're 25.
How do people stay grounded, like, in the process when they're when things aren't happening immediately for them, like, and when they're doing all the right things and yet success isn't right in front of them? Like, how can people kind of course correct their mind?
I think that the reason that we're like, oh, I'm not getting success that I want is that we're seeking, and I'm just going to go back to this. We're seeking, we're defining success as symptoms
Right.
instead of causes. So if I work on these causes hard enough, that my lack of success is a lack of me kind of working and getting to the place I need to be. 100% the world's not fair, never will be. We just got to get over that. And that sucks. But like if you read the autobiography of like Oprah and like read how Oprah was born in her early years, most people's life doesn't even compare to that level of horror and nasty upbringing and unfairness. So that should delete all of your excuses. Like there are, for everything that anybody would say that they've been through, there are 100 successful people who've been through way worse than you have. So it's definitely out there. But my vision of success should not be a symptom. It should be a cause. So am I following all these things? Then yes, then that I'm achieving my goals. So my actual goals are just these behaviors and habits that I need in order for that $1 million to be there.
I know we talked in our last conversation about dopamine and how people have an unhealthy relationship with dopamine. I'd like to kind of revisit that because I don't think things have gotten better with that for people. And maybe there's people who didn't listen to our first conversation. Like, why do you think, or how can people have a better relationship with dopamine so that they can, maintain this real sense of joy and fulfillment about life?
Yeah. So the first is to figure out where we're getting dopamine from. And the way to do this is you take a like a regular sheet of printer paper. I was looking around to see if I have some in here, but you draw a line down the middle, a little circle on that line. So you kind of make it look like a little basketball court. And on the left side of the page, you write down everything that you're getting dopamine from in your life, everything that you're getting pleasure from. And confusing pleasure and happiness is the number one way to ruin your life. Pleasure and happiness are not the same. They don't even touch each other at all. So where am I deriving this dopamine pleasure seeking behavior from? Maybe it's chocolate or cheesecake. Maybe it's uh, watching porn, or maybe it's doing drugs or alcohol, or fill in the blank. All these things that I'm getting it from, and that's the time to be honest that I'm also getting it from Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. I'm getting dopamine hits all right there. So I'm going to draw out a map of where all that dopamine is. And then I'm going to assign a point value. Let's say I'm limited to 100 points. And I'm going to assign a point value to each one of those. And then on the right side, where's all the places I'm getting good dopamine from? And our number one source of dopamine should be X and Y and Z. So it's different for everybody. It should be us, right? It should be me. It should be if I'm really setting myself up for success and I want to wake up at 4 a.m. The moment that I wake up, I feel fantastic because the nighttime version of me took the multivitamin, took the magnesium, went to bed on time, drank a full glass of water, fill in the blank, all of these things to make me present day feel fantastic. But if I have all these negative things down this one side of the sheet and I go over here and I'm writing stuff like doing my course assignments in college or spending time with my kids or doing all the things that I want to get dopamine from. And let's say my kids are getting 8 points and Twitter is getting 39. You're starting to see this imbalance. So we're taking something unconscious and putting it into conscious awareness. So the way to know whether or not you're getting dopamine out of something is if it feels good or captures all of your attention during that moment, and then it doesn't feel good later. It's like I taught a course once on how to tell if you're in a conversation with a psychopath. And of course you can't. I mean, it's hard, but we went through this big checklist. But one of the big ones on there was if you feel fantastic during the conversation, everything feels great, and then you stop the conversation and all of it just drops off. That is a person who's trained or mentally trained themselves to trigger all of your dopamine hit points. And so you didn't, a conversation that feels good afterwards is more rooted in oxytocin and serotonin. So if I'm doing something in my life and the great feeling of it doesn't kind of fade off gently over time, probably dopamine, which is what we do with social media and all that. So really identify those sources of dopamine. And I'm willing to bet that if most people drew out a map of where it's coming from, and here's all the good things that I get dopamine from, where it's coming from is probably not going to be the right amount. And we want to change, we're going to want to tip those scales for sure.
Yeah, I think once people can understand what dopamine is, I think their life will dramatically change. I mean, it really shifted for me, understanding more about like addiction, and how certain substances just completely hijack the brain. And I think I've talked about this on the show before, but one of the greatest descriptions of like how your reward system is hijacked was when I was sitting in a therapist's office who I believe he was like an addiction therapist or psychiatrist, but in any event, he said to me, he said, you know, when you're not an addict, like thinking about something like the Grand Canyon is like a 10 out of 10 pleasurable experience. And he's like, what happens is you start to do some coke, and then you get this influx of artificial dopamine. Now the coke starts to go from like a 1 to a 2 to a 3, and then the Grand Canyon goes from like a 10 to an 8. And then you've like reversed it to where now, like a few months down the road, your reward system has been completely hijacked. And the thought of going to the Grand Canyon is so boring to you because you're so used to getting all of this artificial dopamine from a substance like coke. And it really shifted things for me because I remember, like, being that person that, like, I couldn't go to the aquarium, I couldn't go to a football game, a baseball, I couldn't do anything without being under the influence of a substance when I was younger, and it totally made sense for me, and I think that it part of getting out of the simulation and what we're talking about now, I just think is acceptance of normalcy in that, you know, the way your brain is responding is kind of normal based on how you're treating it, right? And if you're not changing the way you're treating your brain, it's gonna continue to do the same. And and that's why I think these conversations are paramount. And like how do you think how can people like survive in this world where again, we're talking about dopamine recalibrating and stuff, and yet like I mean there's just dopamine like everywhere. And like you said, you can't like live in a hut and like turn off everything, but you got to stay like kind of tuned in to what's really going on around you.
And I think it sounds so ridiculous, but I think you can look at all the research, it's peer reviewed research that just mindfulness practices on their own. And you don't have to like sit in a room with incense and like spa music playing and all that kind of stuff. You can do this while you're remulching your yard if you want to. But having a practice of mindfulness and being mindful, not just while you're doing the app or while you have the little mindful audio thing in, but doing that throughout your day while you're in a meeting, while you're in um, traffic, while you're cooking, while you're stressing out about having to change a diaper or fix a mess or your roof starts leaking. Can you do the mindfulness in there? So getting good at being present is so powerful because you talk about the Grand Canyon, your face lit up because you have memories. You have real core memories of being present in that moment. You talk about the dopamine from Coke, your face didn't light up because we don't have the core memories from that. So the Grand Canyon is not just a bunch of dopamine, it's 3D experience and being so immersed in a moment. So that's why if we have people that really study mindfulness, and there's some really neuroscientists and psychologists that are studying the effects of mindfulness, but I mean, this has been studied for 5,000 years, but they just called it meditation or they called it Zen or they called it some other word. But it's just forcing, it's like Caesar Milan. You're taking your little animal brain and you're becoming the dog whisperer and you're forcing that mofo into the present moment as much as you possibly can. Like every time there's a little shift in awareness, you're bringing it back to the moment, bring it back to the moment. And then there's a way to find like this almost a pleasure in everyday things and just enjoying your life as it is. And it's not like you're popping confetti cannons every day, but you're just quietly enjoying what's going on in the present moment.
My face lit up because, one of the most memorable experiences of my life is I was in Vegas by myself for a fitness conference, and I had some time to kill, and I was staying, at the hotel. I was at the Wynn, and there was, like, a, um, a flyer for, like, helicopter ride to the Grand Canyon, and it was, like, the most thing I've ever done was, getting in this helicopter and leaving from Vegas, and you fly, like, into the canyon. It was so cool. I highly recommend, people try that. I mean, it's just I had never been to the Grand Canyon, but it was a hell of a way to see it, and I'm like, "I don't think I ever need to go back," because I saw it in, like, the most complete way possible, and it got, like, the thrill seeker in me lit up, it got the serenity part of me, like, all the things were just engaged during that time.
And one of the things that the Grand Canyon does that's similar to psychedelic therapy is it shows you how small you are and how insignificant we are in the most beautiful way possible. And I just did exact same helicopter ride probably a month and maybe 2 months ago
Oh, really?
for the first time ever. Yeah. And we landed down there in the canyon. It was me and my son. It was so much fun.
Yeah, it's cool, right? And you're there for, like, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and did you go through Maverick? Was that the company? Yeah. Yeah, that's what we did. That's what I did too.
That's really cool. And we landed a little picnic area. They give you some snacks and stuff. Man, it was profound for me to see. I'd never seen the Grand Canyon until just a few months ago, unless it's like looking out of an airplane window or something on the way to LA. But I think there's a profound perspective shift when you go to giant things like that. The Grand Canyon shows you how tiny you are and how big the world is and how beautiful nature is and how powerful it is and how not powerful we are and not special we are. And there's uh, a lot that goes on in our life that we get stressed out about is us trying to convince ourselves that we're super, super special. And we can't be socially injured. Nobody can uh, make fun of us. We can't get any kind of social injury because we're really, really special.
Yeah, sitting at I mean, just to go back to the Grand Canyon thing, I mean, sitting at the front of the helicopter was surreal. Like, because I remember like getting into the canyon, I was like in the back, there's like 4 or 5 seats, and then leaving, you're like in the front, and you're like, oh my god, am I gonna clip? We're gonna clip this rock because it gets you think kind of close. I mean, you're pretty far, but like, it's like about to be a statistic. It was wild. I guess as we're kind of bringing this all to a close, like, what do you think is a if you were to kind of summarize everything we've talked about and leave the audience with some takeaways to escape the simulation, not be stuck, kind of make something of themselves, like what are the takeaways here?
Everything that you can bring, everything in your life that's kind of on autopilot that you can bring into your awareness is more control over your life. You're going to see videos and Instagram shorts and all this where people are going to say, well, here's 6 steps that you need to do to rearrange your XYZ. Here's the 4 little secret techniques. Those might help you a little bit. If they're not in your conscious awareness, none of those cute little social media techniques are going to work. You have to bring the unconscious into the conscious. And I'm not saying you're sitting there Indian style doing a bunch of shadow work and going into some meditation. Just at the end of the day, like what did I do automatically today that I was aware of? And just bringing the mindfulness into like, am I running a script right now? It's the number one way to start changing yourself is to agitate your environment, start mixing things up to where your brain can't predict what's coming next. And B, all of the unconscious scripts that are running in your life, we call these apps in my training, like we have too many apps that are open. How can I open that screen and look at all the apps that are open you don't have to close them. You don't have to turn them off. You don't have to figure some 12-step plan to take yourself out of it. Just be aware of it on a very regular basis. And the rest is going to take care of itself because your mammalian brain knows what to do. It knows how to solve problems. It's been doing it for millions of years.
Chase Hughes, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. Appreciate your wisdom, all your expertise. I always learn from you.
Thanks, dude. Likewise.